Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. For today's episode, we're going to look at the recently released PC version of the popular action role-playing game Monster Hunter World, and how it stacks up to the PlayStation 4 Pro version of the game. Before we continue, I want to clarify that the PS4 version of the game is set to its high-quality graphics mode, instead of its resolution or high frame rate mode, and the PC version is running at a 1440p resolution with all the graphics settings turned up to the highest available options. And if you guys are interested in trying this game out, make sure to check out my game review for Monster Hunter World I made earlier this year, which will be linked at the end of this video. Alright, so to kick off this comparison, we're going to start by looking at some basic texture work. This includes character model textures, environment, and cutscene quality. Monster Hunter World has always had a problem with its texture design. The PS4 Pro version, even when you prioritize the resolution or graphics, tends to have some very muddy textures, especially during the cutscenes. And as expected, the PC version of the game seems to clean up a lot of these textures. But I was surprised to find a few instances where the PlayStation 4's textures actually looked better than the PC version, especially in the opening cutscenes of the game. The stitching in this character's clothes almost seem like they haven't finished rendering yet on the PC version. I'm curious if this is some texture load time problem, especially considering the much faster level and cutscene load times on the PC. Actual in-game textures look practically identical between versions, with the only difference being attributed to the differences in display resolution. Character textures look a bit sharper as well, but again, it's impossible to really notice unless you have them side by side, and I expected a much bigger jump in terms of texture quality on the PC version. The LOD has been improved slightly with a bit more vegetation rendered in the distance, but again, this is difficult to notice, especially with the game's lighting design. The lighting is another area where I noticed some odd differences. For the most part, everything looks exactly the same, but I did notice some variation in lighting during some cutscenes, especially this one where you encounter the Jagras in the forest for the first time. The light cast in the scene is almost entirely absent from the PC version, and I'm not really sure why this would be the case, especially considering the times of day in-game are identical. Shadow quality has been improved drastically in the PC version, with shadows from trees having sharper shadow projection, and more distant shadows featuring softer edges to hide any shimmer. Next, let's take a look at a few effects. Again, I didn't notice much of a difference here. Things like particles, smoke, and water surface all look practically identical between the versions. And finally, we get to the performance, which is probably the biggest difference between these two versions of Monster Hunter World. Performance, even when the game is set to prefer high frame rates on the PlayStation 4, is miserable, with frame rates often dropping below 30 FPS during scenes with a ton of action and vegetation. Monster Hunter World on the PC, however, allows for an unlocked frame rate, and assuming you can handle this resource-hungry game, the game runs beautifully. I'm using a 1080 Ti with an i7-6700 and 16 gigs of RAM, and I get an average of around 80 FPS running around the environment. Unfortunately, a lot of the game's animations are still stuck at 30 Hz, so you'll notice things like the lift in the back of the player hub not moving consistently with your current frame rate. But this is typical of a Capcom PC port, so I'm not really that surprised. Overall, Monster Hunter World on the PC is a less than stellar port of a hugely popular game. It's the better version without a doubt, but not by much. Textures, lighting, and shadows either look marginally better, or sometimes worse, and things like controller support aren't functioning correctly at the moment, requiring players to use Steam's controller API just to get it working. If you haven't had a chance to try this game out, it's definitely worth picking up on the PC, but if you played it in the spring on your console, then you won't get much out of this PC port. I hope you guys enjoyed this comparison, and if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.